went through the European Commission's paperwork for approving the merger, and they said all the mobile operators they'd spoken to thought it would improve competition and that it was a sensible thing to do. There was one competitor that said this is a bad thing because it will increase dominance, it will make swapping from one generation to another really difficult,
right?
And all the sort of things we're hearing now.
But the operators were in favour.
The operators were all in favour.
But how can they say how can they say consolidation increases competition? Just because it would make Nokia
because
stronger?
They thought it would make a stronger player, and they were saying one strong in one region, one strong in another region.
Okay,
there's not that much overlap. But there was a competitor not named, and presumably not one of the big three. There was a player that raised a lot of the things that operators are now saying. That it's going to turn the market into a dominant market. It's going to make swapping from one generation to another quite awkward because you're going to be more reliant on particular suppliers who've got an entrenched position.
Yeah.
All the things that are coming out now, and the European Commission's response was, we think this is unsubstantiated, so we're just dismissing it. And it wasn't just the European Commission, like obviously regulators in all sorts of other jurisdictions approved that deal. And you look back on it now, 4 years on, and it looks like one of the worst blunders of all time, yeah?
Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast. Here we are in the studio again. Hurrah for us. No one else in the office though.
It's very quiet today.
But you got to watch a bit of tennis on your laptop on the big telly in our little breakout area.
Yeah, I've been slacking off a little bit today.
Have you?
Yeah.
Naughty boy.
But I'm working next week when I'm not supposed to be.
When you're supposed to be on holiday.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, everyone's in a sort of hurry to use up their holiday now. Basically,
yeah. I could have the rest of the year off.
All of Informer's just going to grind to a halt as everyone tries to use their holiday up. What are we going to talk? Oh yeah, just to remind you that if you're watching this on the site or on Facebook or on YouTube, you can listen to it on iTunes, SoundCloud, loads of other podcasting platforms like Spotify that I normally mention.
That's your favourite one?
I don't do Spotify yet, although it's coming to the time where Rogan is going to go exclusively Spotify, and that will drive me over, thus justifying. I don't know how much does it cost.
It's 1st of December, by the way. I thought it was January, but it's December.
Is it?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Oh, shit.
Yeah.
So
I thought it was January.
It'd be interesting to see what kind of bump it has on their customer numbers.
Yeah, whether it'll be like 100 million, which is what they apparently handed over to Joe Rogan.
I think the stock went up like $1 billion worth. After
Really?
the announcement.
I think he's worth that much.
It is absolutely huge. Well, I mean,
it's the number one.
Yeah, an indication of how huge he is he's sitting there doing a podcast with a comedian called Donnell Rawlings, and then one of the biggest comedians in the world, Dave Chappelle, just pops by and comes in for the last hour of the podcast.
And they talk about dogs.
Yeah, and they just talk about random stuff.
Is it always in a studio in a specific location?
Yeah, he's just moved from LA to Austin and set up a new little studio.
Right.
Sort of weird.
Sounds like he's going to get fewer guests
capsule.
in Austin, no? You can't.
Well,
there are a few people passing by who are celebrities.
Well, yeah,
surely.
presumably, Dave Chappelle, that was going to hang out with them later. Yeah. But the point is, you can't think of many other people who just spontaneously just get one of the biggest comedians in the world just breezing in.
No, I like the sound of him just actually spontaneously popping by.
Right,
yeah, all right,
yeah, he's just sort of popping by to see if he can borrow some milk or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think Chappelle is in Ohio. Anyway.
We digress.
Yes, I digress. So what are we going to chat about this week? We are going to chat. We're going to start by talking about M&A, mergers and acquisitions. There's been a couple of bits of news. I wouldn't say either bits of news are especially earth-shattering, but we reckon we can talk shit about it for a bit, which is the name of the game.
About, yeah.
So we're going to talk about that. Then we're going to talk about IoT. You and I were both on a call where we were sort of discussing IoT, where it's at, where it's headed, all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So we're going to recap on that a little bit. And the people who organised it will be pleased, won't they? Give them some ROI on their effort.
Mm-hmm.
And then inevitably we're going to do a Huawei roundup. There's been a few little bits and bobs going with them, as there always is. So M&A.
Sorry. Shout out to the Isle of Man.
Isle of Man?
Especially the city of Douglas.
Douglas's capital.
Yeah.
Right.
Most top listeners this week.
Has someone written a story about the Isle of Man?
Yeah.
I haven't.
Has Open RAN been launched in the Isle of Man or something?
No. Well, I mean, we had Open RAN in Ireland.
It's almost the Isle of Man, isn't it?
Yeah. I can't think of many times we would, with all due respect to the Isle of Man and our listeners in Douglas.
Is that where Paul lives?
For which I'm grateful.
No, he's in the Isle of Wight.
Oh.
I can't think of a particular reason to write about it.
Unless someone's done a trial of some exciting technology there.
Yeah.
I Maybe there are lots of Vodafone engineers there at the moment trying Open RAN.
Maybe Nick
stuff
or Mary
with
wrote about it, and I've just done such a shit job of editing their stuff that I can't even remember it. I've got to admit, I do, because they're pros, I do sort of give it a quick skim and figure, I bet that's all right.
Yeah.
Just sort of whack it up.
Yeah,
So
they're
do
the
with
game away
do
there.
with the libel later.
I'm counting on them not being libelous. Okay, so thanks for that, Douglas, and all that. Yes, M&A. So this is an old M&A story. Back in May, you see, that's why I opened mine beforehand.
Deary me.
Now you've just gone and made a mess.
That's never happened to me before.
Back in May, Virgin Media and O2 UK decided they wanted to merge.
Thank you.
And obviously that's a big telecoms merger, and it has to be assessed by regulators and antitrust people and all that sort of thing. And then it just sort of went quiet for a while. And then in October, and to some extent you can imagine why it might have gone quiet, because there has been some other stuff going on. And in October, the UK Competition and Markets Authority, which would be our people to assess these larger mergers, wrote to the European Commission to go, look, can we have this, seeing as we're leaving Europe? And then we didn't hear anything until this week, where the European Commission went, all right then. Which kind of surprised me, because and I'll admit I have a jaded view of the European Union.
No.
Yes, and I voted for leave and all that sort of thing. And as I'm going to come to in a sec, some people don't seem to share that perspective, and they don't mind telling me about it in the
turn
comments.
off the podcast like, fuck this.
Exactly, straight away. Yeah, I wonder where they are in the Isle of Man on this. Because the Isle of Man, it's technically not even part of the UK. It's like sort of its own little thing, I think.
Have they got lots of fishermen there? They might be...
Presumably.
They're
Being a
the
little
sorts who get
island.
bothered about this kind of thing, aren't they?
Right. Yeah, that's true. So, yeah, they want to stop people like the French nicking all our fish.
Yeah. Which they've been doing in a very French way, I think, for years and years now.
We feel the same way about you.
Yeah. So yes, I was just kind of surprised, because they like hanging on to power. There's all this niggle to do with us leaving, how they still want us to be subject to this, that, and the other. There's the fishing issue. There's a European Court of Justice. There's various rules and that sort of thing, and they say you got to stick to all these rules, or you can't flog stuff to the Netherlands or something.
Yeah.
Which irritates me. I didn't see why there have to be tariffs and trade barriers and that sort of shit. Anyway, why can't everyone just let everyone get on with it? It just seems completely artificial and
Starting
silly.
to sound like Mr. Weatherspoons now. What's his name?
Yeah, Martin.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, honestly, laissez-faire, free trade. Just let people trade. Why do governments have to get involved and put tariffs on things?
Yeah.
It's complete bollocks. But anyway, it is what it is, and it always has been that way. And I wrote a piece.
Protectionism.
I think it is. Yeah, protectionism and mercantilism and all those isms.
There's a lot of bullshit that goes on as well. You look at the agricultural sector and the sort of subsidies they've received over the years. What is it? The Common Agricultural Policy.
Yeah.
That's just a way of unfairly protecting the farming industry,
Especially
isn't it?
French farmers.
Yeah.
And this isn't even me having a go at Pierre, it's just a fact.
Yeah.
The French farmers are the massive net recipients of
Yeah.
the Common Agricultural. And some of it, well, this is a complete tangent, some of it's understandable, because French countryside is exceptionally beautiful and French agriculture is exceptionally bountiful and diverse. But then you'd think, well, then why do they need a subsidy? Why don't they just get on with...
It's probably like that because they've got a subsidy.
No, I think it probably always has been.
Yeah, but it wouldn't have
French
lasted.
didn't just sort of get good at cooking about 50
might not have
years
lasted
ago.
if they didn't have a subsidy.
Maybe. Anyway.
We should make this about agriculture, not
Well, we
telecoms.
have. So I wrote this. I wrote this piece back when it was a rumour at the start of the week, and I wrote this piece, and I just sort of basically was mildly jaded about the European Union and its willingness to surrender any power, but then expressing pleasant surprise that it looks like it's going to. And a few commenters on the story seem to take exception to my tone. But the thing is, the commenters are always a bit rubbish. They'll have a bit of a moan, but it's not very cutting, it's not very clever, and it's often just like misspelt.
Let's
So
hear some of them.
The first one I got is from someone called Paul Rushton. At least he's not anonymous.
Now we've named and shamed him.
Yeah.
There's a couple of French names coming up, actually.
Poor Paul.
Seems very pro-Brexit, says Paul Rushton. Not really analysis, but a rant. Ignores the keg issues. Now, I think he meant to say key issues, but he wrote it. Ignores the keg issues to make political points. Sad.
We never ignore the keg issues, do we?
Well, so my
sipping a beer.
reply was, the keg issues are too painful for me to address. And I don't think that's the response he would have been hoping for. But then
I think
Guillaume...
you're responsible for Plod's high blood pressure.
Well, I think so, yeah. And then Guillaume stepped in. That's a French name, isn't it?
Yeah.
And he said, and the key ones, detecting.
We want it in a French accent.
That's just too sort of xenophobic.
It's Monty Python, you know.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, but my French accent's like a sort of poor effort at like John Cleese at the top of the castle. Your father was a hamster, and your mother smelt of elderberries, or whatever it is he says.
Camelot.
Now go away, or I shall taunt you some more. And he goes, the key ones, because you're probably aware that Brexit is going to be an economical nightmare during a pandemic economical nightmare. So two economical
Bloody hell.
economic nightmare squared. And I just went, whatever you say, boss. You know, what can you say? He's predicting the future. What am I going to predict a different future? How are we going to go with that? And this sort of goes on. I had another person who seems French, Joachim Fleury.
Sorry, just before you carry on, I think to enrage them more, you should just never reply. Just let them have a go at each other. Because I think once you reply,
He
I
enjoys
think they're probably
replying too
happy.
much.
They're probably happy you replied. Like, oh, I get the offer to reply.
I don't reply when they're like on the Huawei ones where people just go off on big ones talking about which is better out of America and China. I let them get on with it. It's only when they ad hominem me that I figure I've got to stand
He
up for
enjoys it
myself
too
a bit.
much. You'd be taking away one of his any pleasures.
Well, I
if you stop him
do.
from
It is
doing
quite
that.
fun. A bloke called Joachim Fleury had quite an extended rant just telling me how full of shit I was.
What's the last name? Fleury.
Yeah. Doesn't that mean flowery? Or something like that.
I don't know if this
Sounds like it.
F-L-E-U-R.
It's spelled F-L-E-U-R-Y, yeah.
That sounds like a made-up name.
Fleur is flowering.
Fleury. Yeah, I guess it's a French name. Yeah, but it doesn't. Yeah.
Okay.
The Y doesn't sound very French, but...
He had a go. Bloke called Nigel F. said, Brexit's going to happen, so why still rant about it?
That's Farage.
It could be. Could be.
Oh, for sure.
It's true. I hadn't thought of that until now. But then Nige goes, maybe you should find a rock and crawl under it.
Maybe not Farage then.
And I just went, and miss out on all this great banter? Never.
He'd be offering to take you out for a pint, so it can't be him.
No, exactly. Yeah, he presumably approved of my tone.
Yeah.
Some bloke said that they're not two UK companies because they're owned by Telefonica and Liberty Global, which is a stupid thing to say.
Why? Go on, educate them.
Because the companies themselves involved are UK companies. The fact that their ownership is foreign is beside the point.
Yeah, they're active in the UK market, so it's the UK market.
And when they merge,
yeah, it will affect the UK market.
Yeah, and there'll be sort of a standalone company. In fact, I don't know what the ownership's going to be of them.
I mean, that's
won't it be like when
point. It's like saying that the UK should have no jurisdiction over any foreign company that's in its market when they have an impact on that market.
Or that as well. Yeah, that's another reason why it's stupid. Who was the stupid person there? Let's call them out.
Go on.
M. Robinson. So there we are. Paul Arnold just said, wow, sense the anti-EU oozing between the lines, etc., etc. And he goes, the usual rant is Project Fear, so I just wrote Project Fear. Didn't want to disappoint
Wasn't really oozing between the lines, was it? It was
fairly
implicit in the lines, I would say.
Anyway, so on. Someone wrote something that was so badly written and full of typos and grammatical errors that I just had to point out that it's funny how people can be bothered to comment but not bothered to write it properly. So that happened at the start of the week, and then and then within about 3 days we had the official announcement from the CMA saying that they'd got control of it. Even then, and then I wrote it again. I thought I was even less arsey about Europe in this one because I was saying fair enough, nice one for doing the sensible thing. That was my headline. Yeah. Common sense prevails. I still got a bit of shit at the bottom. What did I get?
People thought common sense hadn't prevailed or something.
No, it's just my tone. It's just pro-European people don't like the tone. So I got someone who calls himself John Bigman. So I think we can make some assumptions about the size of his lunch pack from that. And he goes right-wing Eurosceptic. So now I'm right-wing as well.
Right.
Although for them, Eurosceptic and right-wing's sort of one and the same. Looks for a petty excuse to write a nonsense article that's as poorly written as the reasons for Brexit. Go moan somewhere else. And I just went, so is moaning bad then? Because if that comment wasn't a moan, then I don't know what is.
No, it must be like go read somewhere else.
Well, anyway, it's my website. I'm going to moan here, aren't I? Where do you want me to moan, big man? Okay, so that's all good fun. But the serious point is, I suppose, the merger itself. So I think it's right that the CMA should be adjudicating on it. Both the pieces I've written at the end that I think the CMA should push it through on the grounds that if BT can buy EE, BT being a fixed line player, EE being a mobile player, then why can't fixed line Virgin Media merge with mobile O2? On those competition grounds, I think it's totally fair enough. But Ian, you've got a different perspective on it.
In a way, I mean, if they're going to assess it on that basis, I agree with you. And I think they probably will push it through. I don't think it's going to face the sort of objections that... Because Three tried to merge with... 3 UK, the small mobile operator in the UK, tried to merge with O2 before, didn't it? And that deal did get blocked. And I think that was a European one. But as I understand it, the CMA was opposed to it as well, and would have done the same thing.
Because they're both MNOs.
So they basically... And this is my issue. I think that the way that regulators look at... I mean, regulators are there to sort of protect the market from unfair distortions and damage, I guess. Or are they? I mean, that's what I understand.
Well, I think the underlying question, and we'll explore it more, but you carry on, is what is their job?
What are they? Yeah, I guess this is the thing, because they just seem to have very narrow criteria to me for looking at deals, and they often get it wrong anyway, I think. This is going to go off on a tangent. We could actually encompass all sorts of things as M&A discussion, because I ended up writing something about the Alcatel Lucent merger with Nokia this week.
Okay.
Because I looked back on some of the rationale for that. I went through the EC's documentation on that deal. Very, very interesting now. You look at what operators are saying in the market about radio access network suppliers. Would you encounter an operator today that would say the market's not over-consolidated?
Especially with Huawei being frozen.
They're all running around saying there are too few big suppliers. And this is one of the reasons.
And
we
the
need
last big
open RAN.
consolidation was Alcatel,
very,
Lucent,
very
and
interesting.
Nokia.
Because people don't look back at what happened in 2015 when that deal was being discussed. Rajiv Suri, the CEO of Nokia at the time, went on an earnings call and told analysts that every single customer he'd spoken to was supportive of the deal.
Right.
I went through the European Commission's paperwork for approving the merger, and they said all the mobile operators they'd spoken to thought it would improve competition and that it was a sensible thing to do. There was one competitor that said this is a bad thing because it will increase dominance, it will make swapping from one generation to another really difficult, and all the sort of things we're hearing now.
But the operators were in favour.
The operators were all in favour.
But how can they say how can they say consolidation increases competition? Just because it would make Nokia
because
stronger?
They thought it would make a stronger player, and they were saying one strong in one region, one strong in another region. There's not that much overlap. But there was a competitor not named, and presumably not one of the big three. There was a player that raised a lot of the things that operators are now saying. That it's going to turn the market into a dominant market. It's going to make swapping from one generation to another quite awkward because you're going to be more reliant on particular suppliers who've got an entrenched position.
Yeah.
All the things that are coming out now, and the European Commission's response was, we think this is unsubstantiated, so we're just dismissing it. And it wasn't just the European Commission. Like obviously regulators in all sorts of other jurisdictions approved that deal. And you look back on it now, 4 years on, and it looks like one of the worst blunders of all time. Yeah,
does it? I mean, you've looked into. I mean, obviously,
how can it not? Everybody's now saying that the RAN market is the whole reason for them wanting an open RAN.
So you mean a blunder in a competitive sense?
Yeah. No operators at all. Is any operator in the world at the moment happy that there are 3 big vendors that control 80% of the market? Because that's the reason that open RAN's come along.
Frozen out.
And this could always. How could they not anticipate that? Barack Obama's administration, everybody goes on about Trump being tough on China. All this stuff happened under Obama, actually. All this stuff began under Obama.
Right.
Mike Dano at Light Reading in the US did an interview with Tom Wheeler this week, who used to be the FCC chairman. And he said one of his questions, very interesting, is do you think the attitude to Huawei will change under Biden? And Wheeler's response is basically, all this stuff started under Obama. It's just Trump's been more aggressive about it.
I see.
He was warning companies Obama's administration was warning companies not to use Huawei.
Well, that's true. It's not like there was loads of...
I wonder who
I mean, this is really getting off on a tangent because I know we're talking about Huawei
No,
later.
I wonder who was Obama's vice president.
And so
really,
Europe should have anticipated a lot of this stuff happening.
No, and it's a good point
But
because it's not like there was any Huawei in US networks before Trump.
the operators themselves were drawing up rules and internal systems of governance to prevent Huawei from being used. BT had a policy not to use Huawei in the core for years and years and years. The only reason it ended up with Huawei in the core is because it bought EE's network and they didn't have the same policy. So there are obviously security concerns about it. And yet, so that you're telling me the European Commission couldn't see a situation where that company, that vendor, there might be a pushback against it, and then you're going to be left with a two-player market. And to bring it back to the whole sort of, I just think that regulators look at things in a very narrow lens, and I'm wondering whether they should consider things in another way rather than just saying, oh, this is two players going down to one, or this is one.
So while you're talking, what is... If you were at the CMA, why would you block it?
Well,
it doesn't matter what its remit is.
On that basis of, I think there's reasons to approve it, and I think there's reasons why I'd be not happy with the deal going through. I think in terms of, on the one hand, it creates a stronger rival to BT. I can understand that argument. You've only got one converged operator in the UK market at the moment with a lot of fixed line infrastructure and a mobile network. And that's quite different from a lot of other European markets. Spain and France are very different in that regard, and it's arguably been really good for competition to have alternatives, and this would create one. Virgin's network is 2/3 of the UK now, or somewhere between half and 2/3. O2's got an extensive mobile network. My concern would be, Virgin's a terrible company, Virgin Media. It's for years and years. I mean, you talk to any Virgin Media customer, they've all had customer service problems. They have outages. They've never addressed that. They're massively indebted. Everybody talks about O2's debt situation, and this is the reason Telefonica wanted to do the deal. It's always on about improving its balance sheet position. This deal loads massive amounts of debt onto the balance sheet of the combined company. So they're probably going to have a very highly leveraged company that's going to probably focus on cost-cutting measures. It's going to restrict what it can do. They're going to have branding issues. It's sad for O2 customers because O2 is, I think if you look at surveys, that's been one of the operators in the market that's always come out top when you talk about customer satisfaction. And all of a sudden, they're now going to be merged with arguably the worst operator in the market.
Do you think they're going to lose Sean Bean doing their voiceovers? That'll be a loss.
I mean, maybe even he'll object to it.
Got to have Ned Stark doing your ads.
But I don't know. I mean, we were talking about this before, and I don't know whether it is the regulator's remit to sort of look at things on that basis.
Well, that's it. So I think you've argued the point well, and it's an interesting one. So my instinct as a very self-declared, laissez-faire, small government, low regulation kind of guy is just to let things run its course, let things be as Darwinian and survival of the fittest as possible. Now, I'm not extremist in that way. You obviously have to have a social safety net. We can't have a sort of Dickensian, toddlers roaming the streets, starving type of situation. You have to have a social safety net. And then the same applies to business. I think businesses should be allowed to live and die on their own merits. I think, for example, in the financial crisis, there were some banks bailed out before Lehman went under that shouldn't have been bailed out.
Yeah.
This whole too big to fail thing is an absurd thing. Well, you should be allowed to fail. But that's another tangent, because when you get companies that are so intertwined in the broader economy that they are too big to fail, well, obviously they're going to behave in a certain way, knowing that they're going to get bailed out no matter what, like Royal Bank of Scotland, Fred the Shred and all that. Yeah. It's ridiculous. I just think let them...
I think some of the executives themselves, there's not enough. They don't sort of feel...
Not enough culpability for them.
There's not enough, I mean, Fred the Shred's an exception rather than the rule of someone who did sort of lose his reputation and... But they normally come up with some scapegoat. Oh, there's this guy who's a 20-year-old trader who screwed things up. Let's jail him, and then the rest of them carry on.
Yeah, well, quite. Yeah, they'll pin it on some sort of hapless
Some
gimp
poor
at the
guy
bottom of
who's
the
got
screen.
a sort of graduate program, and he's come
Yes.
over from France or something usually because he's good at maths and
So Nick Leeson type.
more French comments, but he's not. He's tuned out.
No, it's true. We could actually. There was what was it? Socgen, Jerome
That's
Keviel?
the one I was
He
thinking
was
of.
the
He,
French equivalent of the guy in Singapore.
Nick
Was it?
Leeson.
yes,
Nick Leeson, yeah.
he was their scapegoat. Yeah,
Quite.
Yeah.
Anyway, but having said all that, there have to be rules. As I've said many times, Adam Smith in the 1700s pointed out that you have to have regulation, otherwise companies will take the piss. And maybe you're onto something there. Maybe what's he called? John Malone, the Liberty guy.
Yeah.
I was going to confuse him with Karl Malone, the basketball player, for a sec.
Well, he's a sort of expert financial engineer,
Right.
apparently, and I've not looked into. But he's sort of famed for doing deals where he tries to get sort of favourable tax arrangements, and I think one concern is that he will sort of work out a way of loading this
Yes.
sort of, this in a way where he doesn't
As
have to
will
pay as
Telefonica
much.
as well.
Of course, and the companies do that anyway, but. They all try and minimise how much they're paying
Yeah.
in tax. Of course, that's just naturally what you do.
But then that gets to my point. If we're in a proper laissez-faire environment, let it happen. Let the company fail.
yeah,
But what might happen is the worst of both worlds. Is that let this happen. Let this incredibly leveraged, crippled from the start company happen, and then when they start going, well, we've run out of cash. Does the taxpayer bail them out?
yeah.
So that loads of subscribers, so we don't get some unpopular tabloid granny can't watch Netflix anymore
Yeah.
headlines.
Do you know what my other worry about it is as well, though, is that if you look at the 4 mobile networks in the UK, the only one that isn't affected by all the shenanigans that are going on at the moment to do with China is O2. They're 50% Ericsson, and 50% Nokia.
I see.
I think they have a handful of base stations where they trialled some Huawei equipment, but they're not disrupted at all. They're the ones that we can rely on, arguably, to keep rolling out 5G and making investments.
I see.
And
Without all
and,
this-
and now we're in a situation where this might be slowed down and crippled because of some deal that happens that means its priorities shift entirely. And meanwhile, we've got huge disruption going on at BT and Vodafone, they say.
And what about fixed line? Because obviously Huawei does fixed line. What
Well,
are
I
the
think
rules
the
on that?
decision's a bit unclear there, isn't it? It was
Yeah,
almost
'cause it's all about
kicked down
5G.
the road. It's all been about 5G. So I know they can't use. There's a rule where they can't use fibre from Huawei
Yeah, because it's
after.
backhaul and all that.
There's a limit, isn't it? It's 35% after early 2023.
Right.
That is the you can only have 35% Huawei in your fibre network.
And do we have any idea about numbers for people like OpenReach and Virgin?
Yeah, OpenReach is heavily reliant on Huawei.
Right.
But they do have other suppliers in there. They have Nokia, and they've also brought in Adtran recently, which was a move. It's very much. I mean, it didn't get as much attention because of all the focus on 5G, but that was very much. It's a bit like bringing in Ericsson, as they've done recently on the mobile side. They say that they don't seem to think it's as much of an issue. I mean, I haven't got the data of what percentage of the network Huawei does actually account for, but I get the feeling it's been the company that's built most of the existing fibre network. Now the thing is, OpenReach plans to increase that a lot. Yeah, it's building out all the time. So perhaps by 2023, when we've got a bigger footprint,
Bit much smaller,
Nokia does more work and Huawei does less, and then they're within the right kind of parameters they need to be. Maybe that's what they're thinking. But I don't think there's been a decision yet on banning Huawei entirely from. I might have that wrong actually. They might be banned from the fibre market as well, but beyond 2027.
Yeah, well, if they haven't made a big noise about it. That's for sure. Okay, so yes, so I think that's an interesting thing. To recap, I think it's good that we're ruling on it. I think it was absurd. I mean, we're leaving Europe at the end of this year.
Totally,
whether these moaning bitches on the comments section like it or not. And so, obviously, we should take as a classic example of why we're leaving. One person sort of referred to my use of the word sovereignty and put it in scare quotes.
Yeah.
Well, sovereignty is what it's all about. You might not think that we're capable of governing ourselves, which is a perfectly sort of arguable position, but the whole point of Brexit was so that we make our own rules. So it'd be ridiculous to not
on
adjudicate
the Europe
these things.
issue, because I'm less sort of
Strident.
I'm less strident than you are on Europe. I'm more a sort of middle of the road person,
Okay.
and I did vote to remain, but I was also
Splitter.
a bit wavering. But one thing, if I look at the reasons for leaving Europe, then I always thought it was a bit nonsensical, that sort of thing anyway, in the first place, that that decision about O2 and 3 was taken by Europe. I mean, things like that to me, I don't understand why a decision like that. To me, Europe should be a trade arrangement where we get low tariffs, we get free movement of people, we can go across borders easily, all those sorts of things. Great. I don't understand why some of these other things go along with it.
Harmonisation of rules and regulations.
Yeah, I mean, I don't understand why we have to have some supranational body looking at mergers and acquisitions.
To steelman the European position, they'll say all the open border stuff and the free trade stuff only possible with harmonisation of all these regulations.
But it clearly isn't, because they do free market trade deals with other countries like Canada and whatever.
Well, I think it's freer. It's freer.
Yeah, but there's got to be. We do not have to have a situation where the European Commission is coming in and saying a deal that only applies to the UK that doesn't affect anywhere else in Europe. O2 and 3 merging has got nothing to do with the rest of Europe at all. It wouldn't affect them in any way. Why are they ruling on that?
Well, I think one of the reasons was this. This is the problem. This is why people like me voted to leave, because you get this excessive standardisation across the whole continent, not making sufficient allowance for the fact that these are all individual sovereign states that have been doing their own thing for thousands of years.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, we can't let you do it because then we've got to let them do it. It's that sort of thing.
Yeah, but then it's where does it stop? This is where it spirals towards
that creeping
it's creeping federalism.
Yeah.
And I think that's one thing that even people who love Europe and are much more sort of on the Remain sort of end of the spectrum than I am, I bet very, very few of them say they'd like to live in a federal Europe where you have some kind of system like they have in the US, for instance, and we become like Ohio, and France is.
Well, that's definitely
North
where
Carolina
it's
or something.
And to be honest, you could argue that's the only way something like this can work. Certainly everyone's got to have the same currency, and we didn't. And it's arguable that we couldn't have left.
I mean, that's everybody must admit that was a mistake now. They just can't unwind it. But how does it...
Well, it's not a mistake if you have a proper... This is another tangent, but what the hell?
It is.
It's not a mistake if you have a proper United States of Europe. But the big thing people talk about is you can't have political union without fiscal union.
I agree with that, which is why I don't think they should ever have had fiscal union. I thought it was a nonsense thing to do. And I think people have...
So we're not a million miles apart. I suspect among Brexit people who are capable of nuance, the issue really is whether they thought that UK should hang around and try and fix it from within, or just throw in the towel. And I was a throw in the towel person, and you were perhaps a hang around and try and fix it person.
Yeah.
And that's why the silliness of all these people that get triggered by my articles. There's no nuance.
Well, this is a common problem in the world now, the lack of nuance. Europe's just ridiculous because, as you say, you go on Facebook pages and chat sites and Twitter, and it's all like all these people who were probably moaning about Europe before, saying, Europe doesn't work very well, does it actually? But they wanted to be in it because they're probably like me, thinking, let's fix it from within. Have all of a sudden become, they want their passports to be maroon forever, and they walk around with a beret and onions around their shoulder just to prove how European they are.
Blue and white stripy top.
Yeah. It's ridiculous. But
actually, I will say, on the topic of M&A, and then I'm going to move it on very quickly to the other thing, because we've done this for a while and we've got to get the other stuff
the
in.
BuzzFeed stuff that we were...
Yeah, but before I go on to the BuzzFeed thing, on the topic of M&A, one in which I quite often am complimentary about the EU and the European Commission, my critics might want to know, is when they take on big tech, like we talked about last week, I think it was. Sometimes you need a bloc with the size, weight, and influence of the EU to take on massive companies like Google, Microsoft, Intel, Facebook, whatever.
Yeah.
And on the whole, they seem to do a decent job. I haven't been too critical of when they've had a pop. They seem to do it quite fairly. But they also... think about Europe, everything takes forever. It's like a super tanker.
Yeah.
But when a thing gets done, it's properly done. It's signed, sealed, delivered. It's a done thing. And the company's got to deal with it. So those are the pros and cons of it. So I'm pleased in a way it exists on things like that. I'd just rather not be part of it myself.
Yeah.
So, BuzzFeed, very quickly. The only reason this is relevant is because Huffington Post is owned by Verizon. 5 years ago, Verizon bought AOL. It went on this spree of buying sort of 1990s internet brands. It bought AOL
Yahoo.
and it bought Yahoo.
That's a very bizarre move.
It was very odd, and then called the combined company Oath.
Yeah.
For some reason, Oath more
Should
like.
have been Struth.
Exactly, or something else, anything. And then 2 years later it ditched that because on the grounds that it was shite. I don't think that was their official press release on the matter. That's me reading between the lines.
You should write their press release.
And when it bought AOL, AOL had previously gone on M&A. They had AOL was part of the most disastrous M&A ever, which was, funnily enough, Warner and AOL.
Yeah.
The reason it's funnily enough.
How the hell did Verizon get this deal past its investors, I wonder? I mean, two failing brands, Yahoo and AOL. Did no one go, hang on a minute, why is this a good idea?
Well, there's two failing brands getting together to make one good brand is a common theme, as I'm just going to lead up to. So they bought AOL, which had Huffington Post was its biggest brand, but it also had TechCrunch, Engadget, a few other content brands, mainly written journalistic content.
Pretty good brands, some of them. Yeah.
TechCrunch is still good.
Yeah, very good.
But I think it was even better when the founder, Michael Arrington, was at the helm and he was writing about startups. He really sort of redefined the whole startup journalism thing. Anyway, the rationale at the time was diversification, and they're going to get into content, and there'll be all these synergies to do with ad networks, and maybe they can get Verizon customers to subscribe and bundle, all the usual stuff that goes on with M&A, synergies and economies of scale and overlaps and complementary this and that.
Things that are very hard to sort of imagine.
Yeah.
There's always a lot of jargon attached to them in the press release, isn't there? Because you they can't explain it simply because they don't actually understand it themselves well enough. So
no, well, talking about jargon, I've got to fire up the canned comment from the Verizon guy on this one because it's some of the most perfect corporate bullshit I've seen in a while. And I cover Qualcomm press releases, so that's saying something. And so anyway, cut a long story short, that was 5 years ago. They were ill-equipped to do anything with these media brands. And then lo and behold, I wrote up a rumour a year ago that they're trying to get rid of Huffington Post. Yeah, bear in mind, they paid $4.4 billion for AOL, and the biggest single property within AOL was Huffington Post at the time.
Yeah.
I can't remember what AOL paid for Huffington Post when it bought it off Arianna Huffington and co. But it was at least hundreds of millions, I think.
Gosh, she did well out of that, didn't she?
Yeah, she's doing all right, yeah. And now she just gets to go on.
A lot of it's aggregated content, isn't it, on the Huffington Post?
Yeah,
maybe it didn't start out that way.
Well, and even more so on BuzzFeed, which has sort of defined that genre. Yeah. And funnily enough, the guy who created BuzzFeed was also one of the people who created Huffington Post, a chap called Jonah Peretti.
Right.
Anyway, so now Verizon's finally got rid of Huffington Post and flogged it to BuzzFeed. But the terms of it are a bit weird. Basically, it's all share. They haven't disclosed how much, which normally implies it's fuck all.
Yeah.
And it's all shares. And Verizon is investing in scare quotes for those not watching the video, BuzzFeed. So as one person, a very well-known tech commentator called Peter Kafka has said, this means Verizon is literally paying BuzzFeed to take over Huffington Post,
right?
Because BuzzFeed's giving Verizon some stock and Verizon's giving BuzzFeed some money.
So they're just trying to offload it, basically.
So that was one of my concluding paragraphs. As I said, the whole thing feels like a desperate face-saving exercise by Verizon. It seems to have effectively given Huffington Post away and then attempted to spin it as a cunning plan through this chap called Gaurapan. It's a sort of Indian-looking name, which I probably pronounced wrong. But let me give you his... So he's the head of Verizon Media, which is what used to be Oath.
Right.
So his full name is Guru Gaurapan.
Uh-huh.
And this is his canned quote in the press release. Verizon Media's strategy has evolved over the past few years to focus on our core strengths: ads, commerce, content, and subscriptions. We've created a powerhouse ecosystem built on a trusted network that delivers an end-to-end experience for consumers and advertisers. The partnership with BuzzFeed complements our roadmap while also accelerating our transformation and growth. I mean, it's just so many corporate buzzwords. And I said, even by US standards, there's a lot of oblique corporate speak in that canned quote. If content is such a strength, why are they giving away their biggest content brand? Why is there no mention of Huffington Post in the statement? What partnership? What roadmap? What are they transforming into? How do you accelerate growth by selling assets? I mean, there's just so much wrong with that quote. It's ridiculous. Anyway, so it feels like they didn't get any decent bids on Huffington Post, or HuffPost, as it seems to be called now. And they finally found this guy who founded it, and he went, look, I'll take it off your hands, but you better fucking make it worth my while. Yeah, you can have a bit of stock, but you better invest. And so he's chucking some money, and they haven't said how much. And that's it, really. And then I won't read out the quotes, but Peretti's coming out with all these talks about synergy and two great brands and all that sort of thing. And then just the other point I wanted to make about these two coming together, I did a bit of research on the nature of them. So BuzzFeed's an interesting one. Huffington Post is still a largely current affairs, sort of political journalism type of site. It's always been very leftist. There's a site called All Sides that does a media bias chart, and it's got 5 columns. It's got very left, a bit left, centre, a bit right, very right. And both BuzzFeed and Huffington Post go in the very left bit, which is fine.
Right.
But that basically excludes half the total available market for political journalism, doesn't it? If you're known as being very biased in one direction.
Yeah.
And then
they're that extreme. They're viewed as being right on the left, those two sides. Wow, okay.
Yeah. Together with people like sort of Slate and Vox and the New York Times, it should be said.
I mean, that's bizarre, isn't it, that a publication of that stature is parks itself on that one end of the political spectrum.
I was listening to a podcast on the way in that said about, I think it's 80+% of New York Times readers are Democrats.
Right.
80+%. That's like the Guardian here and the Labour Party, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the Guardian's not even on there. Anyway, and then there's another thing from Pew Research that talks about trust, distrust and awareness of news sources. And it's got a bunch of bars where they've asked people, this is in percentages, whether they trust, distrust or don't give a fuck about a news source. And so you've got like BBC has 35% trust and only 10% distrust, and so on. And then what have we got? Huffington Post has got 12% trust, 23% distrust. And BuzzFeed's got 7% trust, 24% distrust.
Wow.
So this is back to your point about getting two struggling properties and merging them in the hope that that's going to somehow, kiss the frog and make it into a prince.
Yeah.
I just can't see it. You've got two leftist brands that are profoundly distrusted, judging by their numbers, even by some leftists.
These companies have really lost their way then, because they were obviously very successful properties at one time, weren't they? And
they were.
Huffington Post, I never really read it, but I remember it coming along and being regarded as like the bee's knees in sort of online journalism.
I think these things like, God, what was the one that Tim Pool was in? I've forgotten the name of it now. Vice. So right. Vice was very current and edgy, but the timescales are so compressed in the internet world. You can go from being the hot new thing to irrelevant in 5 years.
Yeah.
I mean, BuzzFeed has one of the biggest problems, and I'll wrap out from there because we've been banging on this one for a while. One of the biggest problems with media on the whole is ever since the internet came along, they've been chasing the ad-funded model, which is just get raw traffic and sell ads against the raw traffic. Problem is, the only people who actually make money from that are Google and Facebook and one or two other internet giants.
Yeah. But it's interesting, the operators, this media obsession that US operators seem to have, because it's not just Verizon, is it? AT&T's gone into this quite heavily in a different way with its Warner, and that's sort of, you're getting told off for putting
my phone's apparently buzzing.
But that
it's creating BuzzFeed into the microphone.
I like it.
Sorry, you were saying?
The whole sort of Time Warner thing is looking increasingly. It's arguable. You could say it's too early to pass judgment on it, but is it? It's been a few years now, and it's it's been a really bad year for it. I mean, this pandemic's not helping, I know, with that kind of type of business. But even
why shouldn't
before
it be? I mean, Netflix seems to be doing all right. You know,
they
everyone's
do.
stuck
I think
at
it's
home.
more about production, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's the issue.
Oh, yes. Well,
because,
that's
because they have a
definite.
big production side to Time
That's a
Warner.
definite.
So
Well, I mean, I could see. I mean, it was a much bigger bet, Time Warner. I could see it made a bit more sense because video on demand has to be delivered over cable.
yeah.
So I could see a bit of a.
I think they should
Venn
just sack
diagram overlap there.
actors and just use computer-generated
Right.
people.
You'll be saying they should do
I mean, they've done it
computer-generated
before, haven't
journalism
they?
next. Anyway, just one thing I want to finish off.
Draw the line there.
On the BuzzFeed one's interesting. So they're known for that their listicles, like 17 ways in which you can nut a wall and not hurt yourself. Or something. It's just random stupid stuff. And that's fine. They're very viral. People share them on social media, and people,
30 best guitarists of all time, that sort of thing.
yeah,
Things
but
like that.
even more trivial, obscure
Like,
stuff.
which character are you?
Yeah, exactly. There's the
right.
questionnaire type of stuff. Which Game of Thrones character are you, or something like that.
Right.
And that's all very viral, and that spreads on social media, and that's all fine, and that generates traffic. But even that's not paying off for them, and they've started basically going for a two-pronged affiliate model where they write a story and go, by the way, Goose IPA is really great pale ale, and then you've got a buy link, and as an affiliate you get
Yeah.
a kickback off the
It's
buy
like
link.
sponsored content.
Well, that's affiliate. Yeah, I suppose you could say that, but it's a bit more woolly.
Referral kind of.
Yeah, a referral type of thing. It was popular a little while ago. You could start up a blog and just basically whore yourself out
Right.
through an affiliate thing. But then they've started doing their own branded stuff, like BuzzFeed branded this, that, and the other. There was one funny story I found. They've started selling BuzzFeed branded sex toys. I mean, why? You can imagine bringing one out and go, look what I got, love. Anyway, let's not go too far down that road. But that's just an indication of how desperately they've been trying to diversify in order to make a few bucks.
That is pretty
So
desperate.
I don't think, I can't see how the combined entity of biased, untrusted news brand plus sort of listicles plus affiliate stuff is going to work. It all feels a bit desperate.
Maybe the sex toys will sort them out.
Sort them out, yes. Another one for the drum and cymbal there. So anyway, we better move on before we start getting smutty. And we've been talking for fucking ages on this.
Yeah.
IoT. So this week we had one of those Zoom things that we're all forced to do these days because we're not allowed to leave the house.
I do want to open another beer.
I think you better.
I've already gone through quite a few though.
Well, good man.
All right, well.
And we had one of these Zoom things, and it was organised by Bix, which is a Belgian. They're known for sort of roaming and interconnect.
Yeah, international carrier stuff.
International
yeah.
carrier stuff, and they're Belgian, and they bribed. Actually, this is the second week in a row we've been bribed. I think we should set up a regular thing called Bribe of the Week. Just if only to encourage people to continue to bribe us. So because then you get a mention on the podcast, don't you? And they bribed us with a bunch of Belgian chocolates.
Well, when they said they're going to send Belgian chocolates around, I thought it was
It's
going to
like
be
a bag of them,
like
isn't
a
it?
couple of Belgian chocolates,
Yeah,
wrapped
yeah.
up, and there was like a truckload of them turned up at the door. So
Big M&S bag of them.
So I
And that was
put on about
courtesy
5
of Babel.
kilos
Only
of
fair
them.
to give Babel a shout out.
Yeah, it was very generous.
Katie and Jen especially were involved in that one. And anyway, so once we'd finished eating the chocolates and sending ourselves into a diabetic coma, we were going to chat about IoT. And I'm going to hand it over to you. Why don't you give me the sort of top line of what we chatted about and what you thought?
Yeah, I mean, it was very much focusing in on one technology, although I think some of the issues raised are relevant to IoT generally, but it's very much about NB-IoT,
Yep.
which is, it's cracked. I mean, it's a fairly young technology still, I think it's fair to say. I think it was first standardized in 2016. And it's sort of the mobile industry's answer to the issue of low power, wide area coverage. And why do we need that? Well, we need it to do things like provide connectivity for smart meters, for instance, or little devices in factories that monitor temperature.
So the
and
thinking
stuff.
is, you want little devices to be connected to the internet, but they really don't need much bandwidth.
They don't need much bandwidth.
You want them to use up bugger all power.
In fact, the less the better, because they need to be super efficient. And the important thing is
because they're often embedded.
They're
so
embedded,
they're
and you're going to have them there for a long, long time. And they need to be really. They need to have batteries that are going to run for sort of 10 years without needing changing and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So efficiency is key, and bandwidth is really, really low. It's really bitty, sending a signal over a network repeatedly, but it's tiny amounts of data. Basically, it's like the opposite end of the spectrum to massive MIMO and all the stuff that you
indeed all the 5G stuff.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say that the cellular industry got itself in a bit of a tizzy a few years ago because these two technologies had kind of developed outside the mobile industry and were gaining a bit of attention, a little bit of traction.
Which were they?
One's called Sigfox, which is actually from a company called Sigfox in France, and the other one is LoRa, which is...
That's got a lot of French stuff going on as well.
Yeah, I've written about LoRa a lot, and trying to remember its sort of origins are difficult.
There's one company I write about with
there's
them
a company called
Actility.
Semtech, which is a Californian semiconductor maker.
I think
that is the sort of main IP owner.
Yes,
although
you're right.
they would very much present themselves as being a more open ecosystem than Sigfox, which is
a bit more proprietary, isn't it?
Yeah, but the point about these two is that they're kind of doing a similar thing. They're sort of they're not exactly the same as NB-IoT. LoRa is very much viewed as more of a sort of campus network. Sigfox, I think, people say the use cases are different, although I think this is one of the issues when we look at them. Is it really? But they say it's even more efficient than NB-IoT, and it's actually dealing with slightly different device cases than NB-IoT. But basically, they came
LTE-M
along
as well, wasn't there?
LTE-M's another one that Cellular's come up with, which is slightly more in the other direction. So it's better for mobility. It's a little bit more bandwidth. Yeah. And Sigfox and LoRa, they kind of started to gain a little bit of attention, a little bit of traction. And I think the GSMA 3GPP whatever sort of response was that they needed to kind of get into the game. They worried about being left behind because at the time they didn't really have anything apart from 2G. And it's noticeable a lot of traffic is still on 2G networks.
And so we should stress to people who aren't fully up to speed. So 2G obviously we don't use for regular mobile phones anymore, but it's still sitting there as this embedded legacy wireless technology.
Yeah.
And it's relatively low power compared to 3 and 4 and 5G.
Yeah.
So it was sort of used as a default, but it's
it
not.
Was used as a default,
it's not a specialist
ideal.
low power.
No, and it's the idea was that with NB-IoT, that would sort of unlock the key to the Internet of Things because it would allow companies to do things in a much more cost-effective way.
Yeah.
It was much more suitable for technology. 2G was designed for voice communications, really, and it was like, we'll use it if we have to. But obviously, lots of companies turn their nose up because it just seemed too expensive to use. So NB-IoT's come along, and I think it's fair to say it's been a massive disappointment. It was. I remember going to Vodafone.
Exploded, has it?
I remember going to Vodafone presentations and writing a lot about this back into the 2016, 2017.
They've been quite a big evangelist for it.
They were a big evangelist. It's got big support NB-IoT, and the big companies behind it are Ericsson and Huawei. They're the companies that have driven the actual standard through. And on the operator side, very much Vodafone, but also Deutsche Telekom. Vodafone invited a bunch of journalists to its headquarters in Newbury to do a whole day on it. I remember back in, I think it was 2015, 2016. It wasn't that long after I'd started at Light Reading.
Right.
And they were coming out with projections that it would have a sort of there'd be about 1.4 billion LP WAN connections by 2020, including NB-IoT, implying NB-IoT would have a lot of that,
And what do we think the number is?
Well, we know what the number is according to Ericsson, and Ericsson should know.
Yeah.
Its figure for NB-IoT and LTE-M together is 100 million at the end of 2019.
So even if LoRa and Sigfox are on fire,
well, they're not. I mean, look,
Yeah.
Sigfox's target is still something like 15 million, I think.
Right.
And LoRa's actually done better, but it's not on more than. I don't think it's on more than 100 million. I mean,
so let's say, for the sake of argument, they've
hit.
hit 200 million instead of 1.5 billion.
Yeah, they're way
So
off 1.5
they're way
billion
off,
on
yeah.
this, and there is actually there's a lot of connections. There are a lot of IoT connections, but the trouble is, many of them use they're kind of short range technologies. They don't use this stuff at
Yeah,
all. They use
almost
things
like
like
Bluetooth or
Zigbee
something.
and Bluetooth and Wi-Fi even in some cases. So it's just been you talked to Vodafone at the time, I remember they were very, very aggressive about it. They were sort of, in terms of what impact it was going to have, but also how it was going to see off Sigfox and LoRa. They were like, it's going to crush those technologies because this is what everybody's been waiting for.
It almost felt like LTE versus WiMAX.
Yeah, and one of the big issues with LoRa and Sigfox, which came up on our webinar, is that they're sort of unlicensed spectrum technologies. I think the point was even made on the webinar we were on that a couple of the operators using LoRa in France are using the same spectrum.
So it should be stressed that BICS are quite pro NB-IoT, aren't they?
They are pro NB-IoT, but what I liked about the webinar, I have to say, is I thought it was very frank about some of the problems it's run into. I expected to get on and have a bunch of people saying, well, actually, NB-IoT is doing really well, and and this is our pitch. They didn't do that at all. They basically said a lot of the stuff that I think I've just been saying. That hasn't kicked off. One of the issues apparently has been lack of roaming agreements. So companies have been waiting for.
So that's just a button. That is where you could think maybe there's a bit of self-interest, because we're always, as journalists, whenever a company goes, listen to us talk about this, I'm always thinking, okay, what's your angle? BICS is a roaming company. They say roaming's been a deficiency. Fair enough. But I agree with you. I think even allowing for the fact that a company isn't going to bother to set up a Zoom call and bribe us with chocolates if they don't have some kind of agenda, I think they were pretty balanced.
They were pretty balanced. The roaming stuff, yes, obviously they've got a big vested interest in saying that's the thing that's held it back, because that's where they fit in. They're positioning themselves as this kind of middleman that can play this role where it sorts that problem out. And they were saying that one of the issues has been, companies have not been able to get easy roaming deals because there hasn't been the coordination between operators there needs to be. So you've ended up having several discussions going on at the same time. Information doesn't get transferred very easily. The pricing system's all wrong. You end up paying a lot of money if a device is going around a few countries rather than just staying in one.
And one of the reasons roaming's so important is a hell of a lot of IoT stuff is
moving
things
around.
Like transport and logistics.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's like a replacement sort of RFID type of stuff.
It is, although this is maybe where you've got a good point about the self-interest thing, is that NB-IoT, to my knowledge, is, I would have thought roaming would apply more to something like LTE-M, where mobility is more important. If you're talking about fleet management, that seems like a more appropriate technology. Whereas NB-IoT's things like smart meters,
embedded
sensors, which maybe aren't moving around countries as much, but
maybe.
But anyway,
but maybe people like BICS and
who am I to say that's what the customers are not saying?
Yeah, and maybe proponents of NB-IoT want a single.
Maybe they do.
They don't want LTE-M at one end and LoRa at the other end. Because that's another thing to point out. There's a sort of spectrum of these technologies where you've got a sort of sliding scale of bandwidth versus energy usage.
Yeah.
So LoRa is quite near the bottom, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's very small bandwidth, very low energy. So LoRa is probably pretty good for embedded sensors, let's say agricultural ones, that just sit in a field and tell you once a week what the pH is or what the moisture is or something like that. Where you just need a tiny little burst of data, not very often.
Yeah.
And then LTE-M's at the other end, where you're getting almost towards mobile broadband
LTE-M,
levels.
I think, is probably the one where it's still IoT, but it's getting up to higher levels of bandwidth,
like a 4G connection.
Yeah,
and thus that's not very energy efficient. So it's not going to work well for embedded use cases where you need a battery that isn't going to run out.
It hasn't, and this is one issue I have perhaps with the different technologies is you talk to people from these various camps, you've got a vested interest in one of them specifically, and they all sort of come out with this argument that they're all doing slightly different things. But then you look at the operators and what they're using it for, and they very much present them in the same way. You look at press releases about LTE-M, and people talk. Orange, which is a very big LTE-M supporter across the whole of Europe and hasn't really got behind NB-IoT at all, talks about using LTE-M for a lot of this kind of stuff, a lot of the kind of use cases that you might associate with NB-IoT. So you do wonder if some of them are cannibalizing opportunities in the other ones, and it's just a case of which one. And this is where I think NB-IoT's got an issue, because this is another thing that came out on the call, which again sort of contradicts the message that was being, that we've been being told a few years ago, that it was a very easy upgrade NB-IoT. If you had up-to-date 4G kit, it was just a software upgrade. That lovely expression, software
little
upgrade.
OTA.
Yeah,
patch.
An easy thing to do. And this is very much Vodafone's message. SFR sent, you'd have got them as well. The comments from SFR were very interesting. Who is a French operator that was supposed to be on the call.
Sorry, Katie,
you haven't read them. Well, I can tell
them.
you. I can tell you what SFR said because I wrote a piece on it and I went through SFR's comments and I was hoping they'd be on the call, but they weren't. But the comments they sent by writing were really interesting because they.
Oh, my loss.
They specifically drew attention to this software upgrade.
Lazy bastard.
No, it's not just a software upgrade. You have to swap out a lot of stuff. It's quite a hassle to do it. They specifically said LTM's much easier, and Bix said the same thing. I remember on the call they were saying it's a much easier transition to go to LTE than it is to NB-IoT. So it's interesting that you look at what's happened with some of the pushback that NB-IoT's had in the market in this year specifically. Actually, NTT Docomo in Japan gave up on it entirely.
Yes, I remember that.
Dish Network, which was apparently trying to develop NB-IoT, did the same thing, and they wrote off quite a lot of money when they did so, about 250 million, I think. So that's a sign of how much investment's having to go in. And they just said forget it. And then other operators like Orange have decided, or Orange as we should probably say properly, they don't really have any commitment to it at all. I think that one or two markets they're using NB-IoT, but they're very much building their IoT strategy around LTE-M and LoRa.
Yes,
and this is the other problem I think is that it's had is that because it's been more difficult to roll out than we were told. Rollout hasn't, coverage was this issue that came up. Coverage has not been there.
And another issue
for
Bix brought up was just the cost per megabit or whatever. So they're lamenting the fact that this is one thing I took from what Bix said, if I remember it rightly, through my diabetic haze.
You ate all the chocolates immediately before the webinar.
Just funneled them. No, I only had like 3 or 4, but it catches up with you when you're not used to eating stuff like
Especially those truffles.
Yeah, exactly. They were naughty, weren't they? Is a degree of frustration that directed at operators that they haven't got their shit together more. Yeah. Now, forgive me, Bix, if that's not how you meant me to interpret it, but that's how it came over.
It does, yeah.
Which is fair enough, and I suspect one reasons I was mentioning the other standards and the scale is NB-IoT resides somewhere in the middle in terms of both the bandwidth and the energy efficiency. I suspect what people would like, what a lot of stakeholders would like, and which is what a lot of this evangelism of a few years ago is that we just pick one. Yeah. Because I don't think it really works. I mean, yes, there can be some private use cases like I happen to have just written a story about Actility, which is a low-risk specialist partnering with HERE, which is owned by a bunch of German automotive companies, but used to be part of Nokia, and was before that Navtech, and it's one of Nokia's big failed M&As from like a decade ago. But as a mapping company, so it's one of the best sort of location-based technology companies out there. And they've partnered, and they're going to do useful location-based stuff, but within private network environments. For example, if you're in a factory and you're like, "Where's that widget?" You can just find it because it's got a little sensor in it. But I think clearly what operators would like is for everyone to settle on one. Yeah. And I got the impression from Bix they just think, look, if everyone could just settle on NB-IoT, we can sort out the details later. But I think that's easier said than done.
The thing I take issue with, I mean, there was some optimism, I think, on the call as well. Obviously, they didn't just present it as a sort of, there was a talk about prices coming down now, and that needs to happen as well on the hardware side. They are starting to fall, and that will help to lift interest among customers. And then as shipments increase, they'll fall even further. And if Bix can do something on the middleman side to maybe sort out this roaming issue that it seems to think is such a big deal, then maybe that'll move things along as well. But we really need to see something happening with NB-IoT because it's been over 4 years since it was standardised, and we're obviously way behind where Vodafone thought we were going to be. Yeah. If we have the same conversation a year from now, you've got to start to wonder whether technologies do come along and then just die. Look at 3G is a good example of a technology that's been around now for 15, 16, 17 years maybe. 2003 probably the first network's been launched. Everybody's now starting to turn it off.
And what did it ever amount to?
It's 16, 17 years old.
And you look at the amount they shelled out for Spectrum.
Yeah, and the same. I just feel it could happen more quickly with NB-IoT, that it just sort of gets it gets superseded by other things. And one interesting thing is I meant to ask this on the call but didn't get around to it. What does 5G mean for NB-IoT?
Yeah,
I know there's
they
talk
often
about
conflate it, don't they?
I know there's this thing that NB-IoT is now a part of the 5G standard, but it's not really, is it?
There's nothing that 5G's uniquely brought along that.
No, and part of the triangle
it.
that we see with 5G is supposed to be massive machine type communications, and there is supposed to be
but what is unique to 5G that
you talk to people
it?
like Interdigital, and they say there will be developments within 5G specifically that deal with that in a much better way than NB-IoT's done.
Let's see it.
But if we do see it, then maybe that, and if we see it, if we see it soon, then maybe that just takes the wind out of NB-IoT sales completely. Not there's much in it anyway at the moment. But I wonder if this is the technology that is going to survive and that is going to be the IoT technology of the future, or whether it just ends up getting replaced by something else entirely.
Good question. Cool. I better move it on that note because we've been banging on about an hour already. I keep pushing my luck down up here with the timing of the pod.
We're getting longer and longer webinars.
We are. Yeah. Okay. We'll make this one short and quick. This is a sort of Huawei roundup, I guess.
Classic.
Let me just remind myself what the news for this week is.
What they're up to now.
Well, one of the fun ones, which was sort of. I suppose, it was Huawei, but it was broader than that, was FT got an interview with Boye Ekholm, the Ericsson CEO, where he went, and I'm not going to try and do a shit
Who wrote the
Swedish
story?
accent, by the way.
Was it Nick Files at the FT?
I can't remember. I can click through, actually, and find out, although I don't know if...
He's normally their telecom correspondent, isn't he? Just not that it's that important, I'm just interested.
No, you see, FT's being a dick and not even letting me look at it. Up yours, FT, because I haven't got a subscription. I mean, you could at least give me the first paragraph. Do you know what I mean? Anyway, he did an interview and he basically went, look. So to recap, Sweden went. We're banning Chinese operators, and the way we're going to do it is we're going to do a 5G spectrum auction, and conditional. If you win any spectrum, the condition is you can only use it if you've got no Chinese vendors involved in your kit. And Huawei's contested this. They're actually taking legal action, which, as we've spoken about in the pod before, we completely respect their right to do. They should have no less legal rights in Europe than a European company. And they've just gone, what's all this about Sweden? And contested it. And Sweden's had to go, oh shit, and sort of retract it and send it back to the due process people to have another look at the whole thing. And they asked Ekholm about this, and he sort of went, yeah, I think that's right. Because he said all the right things about competition, and we really welcome competition that all corporates say, and it's always bollocks.
Yeah.
Of course they'd rather have a monopoly.
Yeah.
But that's fine. You have to be seen to be saying these things. But he also said the correct things about due process that I've just been saying, how, Huawei's got to have its day in court just like everyone else. But, the undertone of it, as far as I was concerned, was him going, sort of looking sidelong looks to Chinese regulators and politicians going, let's not have any tit-for-tat bullshit.
Well, I think Ekholm's quite happy for other countries to ban Huawei. He just doesn't want Sweden to do it.
Yeah, he doesn't want reciprocal action against them
because that's the one
China.
That could hit him. But it's all right for the UK and France and Germany. He's quite happy. He wants to say that. He's not going to say, I'm happy to see that happen.
But if I'm Xi Jinping or some sort of Chinese dignitary, I'm just going, all right, Sweden, see how you like it.
Yeah. I mean, there's been a lot of speculation
They get all it's Chinese, as we know. There's a big Chinese.
It's the Ray Winston,
overlap.
Xi Jinping overlap. Yeah.
See how you like it, you slag.
But people have been saying this for a while, that the backlash against Huawei in the West could have repercussions for Western companies. And what if China comes along and says, well, we're not going to have your Nordic vendors here. Now, I don't think anybody's maybe Ericsson and Nokia have not been that worried about that because their own administrations have not done anything. So all of a sudden, Sweden saying we're not having Huawei anymore is a massive concern for a company that most of its growth, you've got to remember, is coming from China. It's not in the same position as Nokia, which is completely screwed up in China and has no 5G radio business there at all.
10 to 15% market share.
They got 10 to 50, and they're
Which
relying
is
on
a
it
big
for
chunk of their money. Their recent quarterlies.
half a million 5G base stations this year being built in China.
I mean, after they'd had to take a sort of loss leading hit in previous quarters, their most recent quarterlies had a massive boost from China.
It's all China, and you look at the market forecast guys, Del Oro and that lot. They're all saying like the RAN market's massively up this year because of China. It's like 8% growth or
They've
something
just gone
ridiculous
mental for it
because they've built like 600,000 base stations or something.
Well, I mean, the scale of anything to do with telecoms in China is just silly.
Yeah, so it
dwarfs the US.
Yeah. Oh, the US is nothing. It's minuscule. The US with its whole 5G story is all bullshit. It's all marketing. It's all total crap. There's no. Well, the US doesn't have any 5G lead at all. It's all just clever marketing, and they know it. That millimeter wave, all that stuff that Verizon was coming out with, no one else thinks it's useful at all. Millimeter wave stuff, unless you're sort of sitting on the actual base station. Sorry, Pierre.
No, I don't want to plug our own events, but at Big 5G, the US CEO of Ericsson flat out said, "Yeah, we're far behind in the US.
Yeah,
compared to China and
South Korea as well.
Yeah.
They're not. They like to think they're leaders.
5G is an East Asia story,
and I think they've fooled some analyst firms, and I'm not going to mention which analyst firms. And I'm certainly not referring to any of our guys, by the way. But I think they have fooled some analyst firms or consulting groups rather into thinking that they have a leading position in 5G simply because they've done all sorts of there's all sorts of skullduggery going on, like AT&T putting. I mean, they've been doing this back in the days of 4G, claiming that 3G was a 4G service and stuff like that. It's all part of the same bullshit that comes out of America on a regular basis.
Bless them. They do like a bit of marketing hyperbole.
Yeah.
So yes. So Ekholm is quite right to want to be publicly seen to be supporting even-handedness across the world, and he has a massive vested interest in that. It doesn't mean he's not right, by the way, but I do think there's some pragmatism behind what he's saying. And then one other thing, and then we better wrap it up. So Huawei has also been having its smartphone division been getting fucked over by the Yanks because they're... Is it buzzing? Mm-hmm. Because they stopped them getting hold of chips. And there was there was another story I wrote, but I won't get into it, where apparently Qualcomm's been given a license, although I haven't heard it officially, but apparently Qualcomm's been given a license to supply them with 4G and further back chips, but not 5G chips. But that's still... that's still very helpful for a lot of what Huawei does. Anyway, they've got this sub-brand called Honor, spelt the American way, i.e. without the U, about all those extra vowels that the French insist that we put in all our stuff. I'm surprised it hasn't got X's and stuff on the end. You get these French words that are like 20 letters and they just pronounce
and then it would be spelled HEAUNOUR.
Exactly. EUXWXYZ. Yeah. And so Honor was created a few years ago. My analysis was in response to Xiaomi, another Chinese brand. Xiaomi's a direct to consumer brand. So it's all about social media. It's all about people buying unlocked, SIM-free phones direct. And
what's going on?
And my phone keeps making the thing buzz, according to Pierre. Sorry, I don't need to look at it. And so they came out with Honor, which is a similar thing. So normally, smartphones go largely through the channel, i.e. through the operator channel. You buy a smartphone as part of a bundle package and it's subsidised and you're roped in for 2 years and all that sort of thing. And whereas Honor's a direct-to-consumer thing, similar to Xiaomi. Anyway, there've been rumours they were going to flog Honor for a little while, and then it's turned out it's happened. Now, the interesting thing about what they've done is they flogged it basically to China.
To the government, yeah.
And, it's a little bit more convoluted than that. There's a consortium of like 30 plus companies, but a good proportion of them are sort of state-owned, Shenzhen specifically, which is where all the manufacturing happens, just north of Hong Kong. Companies. And I think we can all agree, in fact, we spoke about it maybe on the last pod or the one before, if you're a state government, you're basically part of the Chinese Communist Party.
Yeah.
There's not going to be any autonomy. It's not like Shenzhen's going to go, nah, we're going to do our own thing.
Yeah.
That's just not how it works in China. It's very centralised.
Doesn't even work here that well.
Well, there we go. Yeah, I know. You look at, what was it, Bojo having a pop at devolution this week, and so the way I interpreted it, and I'm sure it's more complicated than that, but, I like to just have sort of simple conclusions, is this is a, you know me, it's not overcomplicated.
You like to rush to conclusions.
Keep it simple.
Well, I've got to write 3 stories a day, man. There's no time for nuance or research or balance.
Shooting from the hip.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I do. Yes, it's basically a way of laundering state money. So it's a way of the Chinese state giving Huawei a bunch of cash to keep it going, which, we sympathise with the reasons why it needs the cash in the first place, because the Americans have been getting seriously aggressive on trying to put it out of business. But it's just admit it. Just come out and go, and look, Huawei needs some help, so here's a bunch of renminbi.
Brilliant word. Is it what's the other one? Yuan in ren.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like sterling and pounds. I don't know which is which.
The M and the N together is very difficult, especially after having had a couple of Brooklyn lagers.
It's designed to embarrass English podcasters. That's clearly what Xi Jinping was like. How can we embarrass Ian and Scott? So yes, and that's what they did. And so they flogged Honor, but the guy in charge of Honor is the Huawei guy.
Yeah.
It just seems like a complete financial
Do
sleight
we
of
know
hand.
what the finances were, or is that not disclosed? What they said?
No, none of it's
they sold
disclosed,
for?
is it?
Of course it isn't. No. What am I talking about?
Yeah. It's not, say what you want about China. Transparency is not a adjective that people associate with it. So that's what they've done. But, if it keeps them going, then good luck to them. But let's just call it what it is, which is state assistance. Now, the only reason it's an issue is all this stuff to do with Huawei in the first place is because the US especially and its allies think that there's too close a relationship between Chinese companies and the Chinese state. And granted, they've been provoked into doing it, but when the Chinese state intervenes to save a Chinese company, it kind of proves the point.
It does,
doesn't it?
Yeah. They never quite get it right, unfortunately. They're obviously very good engineers, but when it comes to big strategic thinking and the bleeding obvious, they're not quite with it, I don't think.
Well, that remains to be seen. There's lots of stuff that you're reading, like The Economist or whatever, about this being China's century. So it remains to be seen how cunning they are strategically. But I don't think they're playing a great game at the moment. It could just be that Trump provoked them into...
Well, I think the power they have could mean it is China's century, it's but the way they're trying to respond to this sort of US backlash on the Huawei issue is just...
I think they're overreaching on lots of stuff. I was reading in The Spectator on the way up about Hong Kong and what a car crash that is. Well, obviously we've got was it Xinjiang, with all the Uyghurs, all that nightmare going on there. There seems to be a lot of overreach, and they seem to have been less than cunning in the last few years. To what extent it was just Trump provoking them into acting in a less circumspect way remains to be seen. But they've done it now.
Yeah.
So even though Trump's gone, I think it's almost official now. There's some Georgia thing.
They recounted, today.
But he's lost Georgia, definitely.
He's lost Georgia,
I think it's like 99.9 recurring percent.
Did you see
I just wish he'd get on with it now.
Did you see Giuliani's last press conference?
And he started leaking hair dye.
Yeah, disgusting.
That was pretty manky.
Really?
That's two... No, there was that, and then the Four Seasons landscaping. There's two bad press conferences.
Well, and also the Borat movie. Didn't help either.
He's not having a good month.
He's not doing well. And he naturally, he's got quite a sort of volatile facial expression, so if you catch him at the right time, he looks mental. So that's quite funny. Anyway, we've done the US election, so we're not going to go there again. So I think that's that. We've been going for well over an hour, so we'll wrap it up there. So thanks Ian, thanks Pierre, and thank you for listening, and make sure you join us for the next one.